morning, everybody. Happy hump day. Welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's Northwest reporter, Hollie Bone. Morning, Hollie.
Morning.
Now, this is the People's Pay-Per-View, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. We'll do our best to answer them for you. Those of you listening later on podcast are just going to have to pray for rain, like the police are. So, what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on the first criminal sentences handed down to those who took part in last week's riots, and warnings that some of them could face up to 10 years in jail and even on terror charges. More on that in a bit. But first, I want to take us to a different kind of cleaning up that's going on. And on page 21, the Mirror is reporting that 3 water companies are being fined a total of, I think it's £168 million over sewage spills in their areas. And the fines have all come from the regulator Ofwat for failing to deal with overflows. There's that, of course, sort of environmental and health problems. Hollie, can you take us through this a bit? Who's going to be paying these fines exactly?
Well, they've come out and said, haven't they, that it's not going to fall on the customer. It's actually going to fall on the investors behind these companies, Thames Water, Yorkshire Water and Northumbrian Water. But, you know, it has to be said that really it's a drop in the ocean compared to the £11 billion worth of dividends that the shareholders have paid. You know, so it's interesting, isn't it? Because is it really going to come out of the investors' pockets, or are customers going to see their bills go up yet again?
Yeah, exactly. It never seems quite to come out from their pockets. So Thames Water, which has got the biggest fines, £104 million. Their CEO is on a salary of 2.3 million. All right, it's 1/50th of the fine, but I mean, a salary of 2 million. And then Yorkshire Water, who's been fined £47 million. Their CEO, Nicola Shaw's on £657,000 a year. That's like 5 times what the Prime Minister earns, and giving us an awful lot more crap. And Northumbrian Water, who's been fined £17 million. Their CEO, Heidi Mottram's on a salary of £648,000. This is silly money, easily. And in the past, you know, water companies, when they've been fined for stuff, water companies have sought permission from Ofwat, haven't they, to increase their bills to pay for either infrastructure and investment, or sometimes to offset those fines that they've received, so their dividends aren't affected, which of course is the most important thing for them when you're a private company. And that means we end up paying twice, don't we, for them to clean up that. You pay them to do it in the first place and they don't do it, and you've got to pay again for them to actually do it when they get caught. They could still do that, couldn't they, Hollie? They could still go to Ofwat and say, oh, look, you know, you fined us £104 million, and we find ourselves suddenly, oh, look at that, 104 million short. Would you mind terribly if we put our prices up? Is there any indication as to whether, you know, Ofwat will do that?
Honestly, I'm not sure at this moment in time, because, you know, obviously the problem that we've got here is that it's like you said, there's nothing stopping them, is there? There's nothing stopping these fat cats from going to Ofwat and saying, you know, we've been affected by the fines. And the problem is that this is what the campaigners are calling for. You know, there needs to be, until we actually really deal with the huge profits that these companies are making and put the purpose of these companies back into the public interest, then this is going to continue to happen. And this is a massive cost of living issue, not just in the fact that, obviously, like you've just pointed out, the salaries that these CEOs are taking home is absolutely huge, you know, eye-watering figures compared to, you know, everyday people. The actual issue at heart is a cost of living issue. I mean, people have been talking about this widely on social media, because water pollution doesn't just affect our health and the water that we're getting through the tap. It also affects people's ability to have safe staycations. Some people can't afford to go on holiday abroad anymore. They're taking their children to beauty spots up and down the UK, and they're fearful of letting their children go out and swim in this water. So, you know, this is a massive cost of living issue that if we don't tackle it, you know, people are going to be not just affected in their health, but in their actual livelihood and their ability to just enjoy themselves.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, what do you think, everybody? Are you worried about going down to the beaches or while swimming? There was a story, I think, earlier in the week about people who being warned not to let their dogs go and swim along the beaches in summer or in rivers, just in case that they start becoming ill as well. It's all getting really a bit grim. I would say a word begins with S and rhymes with hit, but I can't do that on Facebook. And that's not really the appropriate pun. But what do you think, everyone? What do you think these fines are appropriate? Because I mean, they are pretty big. They're pretty important. This is what the campaign groups like Surfers Against Sewage have been campaigning for, isn't it? They've been saying, let's have proper in fines, proper follow the letter of the law, start enforcing this stuff, which is what's happening here. Step one. Step two is how that gets paid for. Does it come out of the profits? Does it come out of, you know, future payments or whatever from customers? And it all boils down really, I think, to fixing it in the long term. And the new government said it was going to clamp down on these firms, that it was going to haul the bosses to court, it was going to block their bonuses if they were still having leaks and stuff. But Parliament hasn't really had time yet. It's only been there 5 minutes. Hasn't had time to pass that legislation yet. It's too early to expect Keir Starmer to have fixed it. But I mean, do you have any? I suppose we don't really know because they haven't said much about it. But do you have any hope that Keir Starmer, what Keir Starmer promised before the election, is actually, you know, coming downstream? What do you think,
Susie?
Right?
Some good puns there, I thought.
do you think that we're going to have the kind of the reforms that were promised, or do you think that in the end this is just going to be something where private, you know, there's been no talk about taking it back into public ownership, is there?
I know, I wish there was as well. You know, I think it remains to be seen. We've got to remember that obviously Keir Starmer's government has only been in power for, I think, 5-6 weeks, something like that. So, you know, but you're right, it's gone quiet on that front, hasn't it? And we're waiting to see whether they really will be hauled into the courts and they really will, you know, threaten them with taking it back into public ownership. My personal belief is that is the best thing, not just for obviously the water companies, but for the train companies. And, you know, I'm a firm believer that when, you know, it is back in public ownership, that it's going to serve the public's interest best, because, you know, then obviously that sort of money that we've been talking about, that £11 billion, is going back into making sure that these overflows are, you know, the infrastructure is improved and that the overflows are dealt with, and that, you know, people who are allowing their, you know, from farms and things like that, the fertilizer, the sewage, all the rest of it's causing this pollution is actually properly dealt with in the best way.
Yeah, it does seem, I think it's not just a financial thing about the cost to customers. I think it's a moral thing as well. If you need clean water to live, then you don't get to make a profit out of it, I'm afraid. This is immoral. It shouldn't be done. Chev says the water needs to be nationalised. All utilities should be. I agree with you, Chev. I think Hollie does too. It's just it's the means of life itself, and you know, it falls for free out of the sky. And I appreciate that it has to be cleaned and collected and sent to your house and taken away again. I don't mind paying for all that, but I really object to paying an investment broker, you know, and companies and funds and stuff on the other side of the planet just to make themselves a bit richer in order for that to happen. Don't think that's a necessary part of the equation. DJ says it's disgusting how much profits they're making. Water and energy shouldn't be run by the private sector. The bosses getting paid ridiculous wages is a big clue. You are right, DJ. Well, maybe we'll have to see, won't we? I'm sure we'll revisit this story a few times yet as the new government does hopefully finally get cracked into it. Now, on to the main story of the day. And the magistrates of Britain have been sentencing the first rioters from last week. I think we have to call these race riots now, pretty much. They keep using the word thugs, and I'm sorry, I don't like that. I think these are racist riots. Well, tonight there is more violence planned, I think with around 40 locations now identified on apps like Telegram, with the instigators urging people to mask up and get down there. Hollie, you've been working on this story all week. It must be pretty difficult for you. I hope you've been safe with that time. What sort of places do we think they're targeting next?
Well, there's obviously going to charities that support asylum seekers, migrants, immigration officers, you know, anywhere that they feel represents you know, the part of society that they seem to be taking such issue with, which is, you know, let's be brutally honest here. This has gone beyond just targeting migrants. They are actually lynching Black people in the streets. There was videos from Manchester earlier in the week of a Black man being attacked by a group of people wearing the St. George's flag around their neck. There's been videos of gangs of kids in Newcastle attacking grown Muslim men. There's been people in Hull dragged out of their cars. People were directing traffic in Middlesbrough based on whether the drivers were answering that they were white and English. I mean, it is just absolutely incomprehensible, I think, for so many people that we have gone back to what we thought was a bygone era. But, you know, it's just, yeah, I mean, I really am lost for words, even when I'm watching these scenes again. I've been there this week. I was in Southport, and, you know, you just can't believe that this is actually happening in Britain, and that countries across the world are actually advising their citizens not to travel here for fears that they may be, you know, persecuted in some way by these gangs. And you're totally right, Susie, they are race riots. I mean, some people have even gone so far as to call them pogroms. It really is terrifying.
What's it been like on those? Right, I mean, I covered the 2011 riots, which was, you know, anti-austerity, it was anti-police. It came out of the wake of the Mark Duggan killing in London. There was a lot of, you know, smashing up Porsche dealerships in Mayfair and stuff like that, as well as people sort of just going a bit mad in their local areas. It wasn't the same as this, I don't think. Has it been different?
Well, obviously, you know, rioting in its nature, I think they they come out, don't they, at nighttime. They use the cloak of sort of darkness to kind of help them in their ability to kind of be clandestine and you know, hide their identity to try and evade, you know, any sort of repercussion from the police. Um, but you know, it's, you know, it is the and I was thinking about the fact that obviously tonight I'm going to be in Toxteth, where they're planning to attack an Asylum Link, which is a charity that supports asylum seekers across the UK with a base in Merseyside. And I was thinking about the fact that, you know, 44 years ago, you know, there was the Toxteth riots where, you know, young Black communities were clashing with the police because of the racist agenda to unfairly stop and search them, and the, you know, the heavy-handedness with which they were being treated. And it is a complete antithesis of that in terms of the reason for rioting. But the violence is just the same, but it's completely mindless. You know, they're not, I don't even think that they really know what they are rioting for, and that's been seen in some of the reactions that we've seen in court this week. I mean, they're sobbing, saying that they've got problems with alcohol. They were drinking at the time. They just went along with the pack mentality. So I think that some of this is literally just to try and, you know, get a kind of one up against the police and try and be violent. But there is a central kind of ideology that is organising these events, these demonstrations, that is really insidious and really dangerous. You know, obviously with leaders like Tommy Robinson, Nigel Farage, you know, stirring up hatred on social media. And we are unfortunately seeing a huge reaction to that, and people coming along, some of them that share those views and some of them that I think are just kind of going along to be destructive and cause mindless violence. But it's going to have a lasting impression. You know, I'm really worried for the young people that are involved in this. You know, boys as young as 11 have actually been hauled into the courts this week. You know, what impression is that going to leave on their political mindset if that's the kind of exposure that they're getting, you know, among the people that they're hanging out with? Because if we continue to allow Tommy Robinson and those sorts of characters to spew this hatred, and we don't unite against racism, those views are going to become more prevalent in the next generations.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that does become infectious, doesn't it? What do you think, everybody? What do you think about the causes of these riots and why these people are out on the streets? Do you have any sympathy for them now? You're starting to see them appearing in the dock and weeping and saying, "Oh, I've got a problem with alcohol. Whoops-a-daisy, I got caught up in things." I mean, what's the demographic on these riots, Hollie? Because, you know, the mugshots that we've seen, they make it look like it's the village idiot and his wife, frankly. Is it fair to say that it's people who haven't been particularly blessed or fortunate, not just in terms of looks, but I mean in life generally? This is some kind of underclass that are reacting against being an underclass.
Look, there's that famous picture that goes around on social media, isn't it? And it's a cartoon of, you know, someone in a kind of like a fat cat in a suit with loads of cookies on his plate, and there's a migrant sat there with an empty plate, and then obviously somebody else who's clearly from a working class background with one cookie, and they're saying that migrant wants your cookie. This is all stirred up by, you know, people who want to try and keep I believe, you know, these sort of deprived areas oppressed, and it's easy to blame migrants and you know, other people of colour for that sort of deprivation that they're facing, rather than looking at the problem. I mean, we've come out of a 14-year Tory government. Let's be brutally honest about this. The deprivation that we have seen has come from cuts after cuts after cuts against, you know, public services, you know, government bodies and things like that. You know, that's you know, they're saying that they're shouting in the face of the police, you know, you're not doing enough to protect our children. Well, where's the questions about why there's not enough money in the pot to be able to like look at, you know, what's actually causing the problems here? And you're right, you know, they do come from deprived areas. You know, the economy of these areas is, I think it's fair to say, is struggled. You know, I'm trying to think of some of the locations. Obviously Liverpool, where I'm going tonight, that's, you know, Walton, that saw the riots earlier this week. That's one of the most deprived areas in the country. Let's be truthful, this is happening up and down the country, all over the place, and I think the far right are really just trying to make this as far and wide as reaching as they possibly can. And I do fear that, you know, people are going along because they're not actually taking the time to really look into what is the real cause and the real reason for the problems that they're seeing in their own communities.
Yeah, and they're being told, aren't they, that, you know, the reason that things are expensive or you can't get a home is because of immigrants have got the jobs, or immigrants have got the houses and all the rest of it. Now, I can remember, what do you think, everybody? I mean, where do you stand on these riots? Intrepid says most of the protesters are kids. There have been a lot of children out on these protests. And like I said, I've been out on some of those riots back in the day, a million years ago, when I was actually a reporter like Hollie is. And when the mob sort of suddenly turns and decides, no, we're going to go and smash this place up now, and everyone gets up and runs because the busies are coming and stuff, there is a sense, there's like a magic, almost a spell, that everyone instinctively just gets up and goes in the same way and does the same thing. It's very difficult to describe. It's like an aura, it's like a sense, isn't it, that the crowd is an organism by itself, almost like a flock of starlings or a hive or a swarm of bees. It just gets up and it goes over here, and you're part of it, and you can't stop it physically if you wanted to. And if you happen to be in the right place, you are swept along. Although, of course, you know, you try not to chuck a brick at the copper when you get there, if you have any sense. But in 2011, you know, David Cameron was told to come back from holiday, and he did, gave lots of press conferences. Keir Starmer's cancelled his holiday this week. But I can remember, you know, things when Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak, whenever they faced problems like this, they came out to the cameras. They were giving press conferences left, right and centre every day, say what they're doing, while perhaps, you know, not doing very much. And there are polls showing that Keir Starmer, I mean, he's doing better than most politicians when they're polling about how they're handling this, but he's not seen to be doing lots of stuff, perhaps because he's actually doing more stuff behind the scenes that is more useful. He's actually working, which would be beneficial, I suppose. But I mean, do you think it would help if he came out and did more than just, you know, like a 5-minute press conference, actually just sat down and did it properly? Would that make a difference, do you think, to how the country sees it, or how the rioters are out there seeing it? Do they blame him for any of this?
I definitely think there is a feeling that more left-wing attitudes are saying, you know, we've got an open door policy, for example. They're saying that's one of their criticisms, isn't it, of the left, that we're too kind of open-armed. But I think, from my perspective, personally, you know, that's just about being human, realizing that, you know, somebody is in, if they're seeking asylum, they're coming from literally probably one of the most imaginable scenarios, something that we, fortunately, in the UK have the privilege of probably not really ever, you know, encountering or experiencing. So for me, it's about, you know, just being human and trying to realise that we've got privilege here in the UK. So I do think that, unfortunately, and probably Keir Starmer realises this as well, that he is, maybe as the Labour Prime Minister, he is a symbol of kind of those sorts of attitudes, and maybe that they are kind of targeting him. I think it's fair to say, you look on social media and there is criticism of him and his policies, and of the left in general. So yeah, I think that I'm not really sure what increasing the length of his press conferences would do to sort of stop that, to be honest. I think you're right. I think if he's doing more behind the scenes, he called an emergency Cobra meeting, he's called emergency press conferences earlier last week when it all really started to kick off. And I think that they're the kind of important things that they're clearly looking at, talking about potentially bringing in the army if it's needed. How many riot cops have we got on reserve? There was fears last week about the number of cops that we've got, and fears about the forces becoming exhausted because this rioting has been sustained and constant, and there's new plans popping up every day on social media. So yeah, I think it's more important really that he is doing those sorts of things behind the scenes to try and stop this, rather than just kind of being a sort of a figure, a face to be a target for all the hatred like previous prime ministers might have done, a talking head, as they say.
Yeah, well, I dread to think what some of them would be out there saying if Rishi Sunak was still Prime Minister. The fact that he is of Asian extraction, and the fact that he's supposedly of the right and on their, on vaguely sort of not on the left side anyway, should we say, not on the far right side, but they'd be having to go at him in the same way, I'd expect, and probably with some rather unpleasant aspects to it as well. Now, what do you think, everybody? Do you think Keir Starmer's doing enough? Do you want him to do more? What do you want to be done about these protests or riots, whatever it is we're calling them now, race riots, as we should be calling them, really? The prison cells apparently are waiting. They have been repurposing some. Cookenwood in Kent, which was a young offenders institution, has been kind of refurbished to take some of these guys. There is a police task force been set up to roll around between different protests and scoop people up and get them nicked. I'm sure that GCHQ are all over Telegram and know exactly what these lads are saying to each other. At least one person, apparently, according to the DPP, the Director of Public Prosecutions, at least one person is already facing or going to face counter-terrorism charges. These riots are perhaps, as Hollie said, being instigated by people who are seeking to overthrow our way of life, fundamentally through violent sort of far-right revolution, domestic terrorists. And Keir Starmer's promising these tougher sentences of up to 10 years. They'll all face the full force of the law and the rest of it. When you've been out there, Hollie, do you think the potential punishments are a thing which is, hanging over them, that's going to stop them heading out in the future?
No, I don't, because, obviously we've said today that they could face up to 10 years in jail, but we're yet to see that. The last the one I read yesterday that had actually been given a jail sentence, it was 2 months. So we are, unfortunately, I do think that we do need to, as much as we can talk a good talk, we need to kind of follow through with that. Many people have criticised the first jail sentences for these rioters as too lenient compared to those that were given to Just Stop Oil protesters. I mean, they faced 5 years, some of those, just for organising a protest. Whatever your views on that, I'm not calling to, try and, make an opinion on that right now. But the point is that that's a protest. These are protests. I mean, they're race riots, aren't they, really? But they're meant to be starting out as protests. They're trying to, share their views and say that they don't agree with what's happening. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be able to do that in a peaceful way, although, when it goes into these racist, insidious views, that's when we need to come down on it. And ultimately, the fact of the matter is that if you're going to go out there and, destroy people's houses and, destroy towns and cities, set fire to police vans, and, police officers have suffered broken bones, broken legs, broken arms. Police dogs have been injured with bricks. I mean, it really is horrendous. And if you're going to do that in the name of racism, that is not a peaceful protest to try and share your opinions on migration. That is that is absolutely should be condemned, and you should go to jail for a long time. So
it's to do with your reasons for going out, isn't it? If it's organised as a protest, but some bad people come along and it descends into violence, as we've seen with some protests recently. Well, that's a protest that's gone bad, and those people need to get nicked. But when it's organised as violence that they then pretend is a protest, that's an entirely different way of doing things, I should think. What do you think, everyone? Are you happy with the way this is being handled? Do you think it's going to die down? It's August. There's always quite often riots over the summer months when the weather's good. When the weather gets bad, they tend to go home. So let's just hope for a cloudburst, shall we? Now, before we move on to everything else, I just want to say as well, reporters that are out on this are always in the face of it. They always get a load of abuse and they can't go home. And there is a huge number of people, I should think, people of colour, people of faith, who are not leaving their homes at the moment, who are trying to stay in as much as possible and who are worrying about what will happen if they go outside. Journalists don't get the same luxury in a way. They have to go to these things. Have you had any problems when you've been on these riots? Hollie, have you been safe? Have you had any issues?
I have actually. There was an incident in Southport where I could sit. I was right by the police line, and it was fairly early on when the riot had started to kick off. So the police officers at the time had got the riot vans, but they hadn't actually got into the riot gear with the helmets and the protective suit on, stuff like that. So they'd formed a line and they had the riot shields, but they had their normal kind of bobby hats on. And there was a man next to me who was shouting abuse at the police, and I could see that he had 2 bricks hidden behind his back. So I was really fearful that they were actually going to get hit in the head or attacked in some way, because obviously they didn't have this protective clothing on. So I decided to go over to the police line and tell one of the officers that he had a brick in his hand behind his back. And his mate basically came over and spat on me, which was pretty vile. Obviously didn't cause me any harm, and thankfully I've got a pretty thick skin, but for somebody else that would be quite traumatic, I imagine. You know, if that was somebody else there was a lady there actually on the same riot who was holding up a poster saying "Hope not hate," you know, we're all one nation, one world. Let's not try and create division. Let's try and create diversity. And you know, if that had happened to her, she was already crying because she was getting so much abuse and people were trying to tear the poster out of her hands. So, you know, I just dread to think that if that happened to somebody who, you know, wasn't as resilient, because, you know, I've obviously had years of journalism, often, you know, you do get some kind of, you know, abuse shouted at you from time to time. It really is quite vile, some of the behaviour of the people out there.
Yeah, well, be careful and watch your back. And when you're out on these things, I know it's quite often as well that the police sometimes don't understand which side you're on, and it's a bit difficult you get it from both angles sometimes. So be careful, and thank you for going out there for us. Now, thank you for that, Hollie. Now, we do have managed to find some good news in the world for you, and here it is. Now, when nasty people start wrapping themselves in the flag, it leaves rather a sour taste in the mouth, doesn't it? But in the mirror, there is something to sweeten that, which is pictures of Olympian Keely Hodgkinson. She's only 22 and a gold medalist already in the 800 metres. It's her second Olympics. And what's fascinating to me, Hollie, is that she's already planning, even at this really young age, really, she's already planning ahead to the next 2 Olympics, to winning again in LA in 2028, Brisbane in 2032. I can't even imagine, you know, planning ahead for 8 years and committing yourself for that long to something, just running around in circles, literally for 8 years. Is this proof that really the best of British do plan for the long term rather than just the next 5 minutes, which some of these writers do?
Absolutely. You know, she's a true Lancashire girl, isn't she? I mean, she's so down to earth. and so like humble. It was an absolute pleasure to watch her. And you know, she talks actually in the piece in the Mirror today about going away. She's planning to have a glass of rosé with her family and her first family holiday since 2019, presumably because she's been so busy training for these Olympics. So that just shows in itself the dedication that she's got to her sport, and you know, to trying to win those gold medals. You know, you can only imagine, can't you, how amazing it must have felt for her to take that win. And she's put so much work into getting there.
Yeah, and just to allow herself one glass of rosé, at 22, she must have sacrificed so much going out with her mates and stuff to make herself the runner that she is, and to just go, well, you know, we're gonna crack on now. For all those people in the comments that have been slating the media and blaming the media for this, that, and the other, it's very easy, isn't it, to blame, say, the right-wing press for stoking a situation where these people go out rioting. Number one, none of those guys in those riots read the Daily Mail, right? They just don't. Okay. And it's also easy perhaps to slate sort of papers like the Mirror and say, well, you're left wing, you're being too kind to the immigrants and all the rest of it. There are fewer and fewer people reading newspapers. There are more and more people getting their news through forums like this online, and we're trying to be as balanced as we can here, and speak to someone on the ground in the shape of Hollie, who's been there and who knows this stuff, and knows far more than you might get to read about or hear about on some other places. And so we're doing our best to tell you the truth of exactly what's going on. If you don't like it, that's not the media's fault. And I think I would point out that the politicians, and I know you blamed earlier on austerity and stuff, Hollie, I would argue as well that Tony Blair's Labour government left a lot of these areas behind and didn't do what he could have done for some of them. And that then fed into austerity and where we are now. Some of these places have had 20, 30 years of being abandoned. That is a failure of politics, not the media. And the fact we're telling you about it, it's just shooting the messenger, I'm afraid. So thank you, Hollie, for taking us through all this. Thank you, everyone, for watching and taking part. We will see you all again on Monday for another edition of the News Agenda. Till then, stay safe. All right, look after yourselves and hold your loved ones close. And if you're an Olympian, wrap yourself in the flag. Otherwise, put it down. And we will see you all again on Monday. Thanks, everybody. Tatty bye.